So in today's lesson we're going to look at the introduction to 3D. So I've opened AutoCAD up, and the very first thing I'm going to do in here is switch my workspace from drafting and annotation to 3D modeling. We could try 3D Basics, but 3D Basics doesn't give us all the options that we're going to be using in this class. So it gives us the very basics of 3D, as you can see up here. The better menu to use is 3D modeling. It has everything that we need right up here, and it looks a little bit cluttered, and some of this stuff we'll use and some of it we may never use, but we're going to start right out fresh here as if you've never done any 3D before. So I'm going to dock my command line down here, see, like that. So basically at any given time we're drawing in 3D all the time. Basically we're drawing from above. We're looking at our top view. So as you can see here in AutoCAD, up here in the upper left hand corner, we're in our top view. Okay, this also correlates to something called the World Coordinate System, or the WCS. You can see that over here in our navigation tool. Okay, we're in our top view right now. North is up here, south, west, and east. And also right here you can see it says WCS. So currently we're in the World Coordinate System. Now this is very important because in AutoCAD and 3D we can change to something called the User Coordinate System, which is called the UCS. And this will all make more sense as we get going along. This icon down here is actually called the User Coordinate System icon. So you can click on it and you can see it. You can actually move it around. You can rotate this and do all this sort of thing. So when you do this, notice that we change our space from our WCS to an unnamed user coordinate system. Okay, so if I drop this down, you can see we have WCS, unnamed, and UCS. So I'm going to switch it back to WCS, and it brings us back to the world. This is kind of like our home base, if you will. So one of the most important things to know about drawing or modeling in 3D and AutoCAD is basically you need to have a fairly good understanding of orthographic projection. You need to understand your top view, your front view, your right hand side view. If you've done this in manual drafting, this will make sense. If you haven't done this, then you may want to study a little bit more about orthographics. Although it's not 100% necessary that you know orthographics, it will make your life a lot easier as you're drawing in 3D. So the very first thing that we're going to do in 3D is we're going to come up here into our View tab up here, and currently we're set up for a single viewport. I want to set this up for multiple viewports. It makes it easier to draw in 3D if we're using all of our 4 views, our top view, our front view, our right hand side view, in an isometric or a 3D view. So when I click on this, AutoCAD will automatically set up our space for us. So notice how it split our screen up into 4 individual spaces, and we have our top view up here in the upper left hand corner, our front view, our right hand side view, and then up here we have another top view. I'm going to switch this over from our top by clicking on this and going to a southeast isometric. Okay, so that sets up our isometric view. Also notice that each view is in wireframe mode, meaning we'll see completely through the model as if it's a tent without a skin, and you're just looking at the poles, okay, which are basically the structure of our model, or the structure of our tent. We can kind of think of a tent in this way. So when we look at an object that's shaded, we can think of a tent with the poles that we're covering it with the canvas and giving it a surface. So we'll start drawing out in 2D wireframe mode, but in our isometric mode we're going to switch this from 2D wireframe to conceptual. We have other options up here such as hidden, realistic shading, shaded with edges, shading with gray, sketchy, wireframe, X-ray. So I'm going to just do conceptual, and notice that our screen will change from white to black, and this is fine. So the very first thing I'm going to do, I have to fix my mouse here. I just noticed that, so hold on 1 second. And we will pause our video. Okay, so where we go. So it's very intuitive to draw objects that are flat. You know, think of things like a gasket, something like a piece of wood that you want to cut into a shape. It has a surface area and it has an extrusion. So the easiest things to draw in AutoCAD are extruded solids, because we've all been drawing with lines and arcs and polylines and all that sort of thing. So the first thing that I would like to draw is just a basic shape, and basically if I use the line command, or the polyline command actually we'll use first. Polylines are special because polylines can be extruded if they're closed. So for instance, if I, in the top viewport here, if I want to draw this out, okay, just kind of draw a shape, okay, doesn't matter what I'm drawing, we'll just kind of draw this oddball shape and close it. So in our top view, we're looking down on top of it. In our front view, we're looking at it from the front on, so we just see a single line. So basically we're looking at from here to here, and we're seeing one solid line going across. And then in our right hand viewport, we're looking at one solid line going across this way. And then in our isometric view, we can see it up here, and we can pan around. And to move around in 3D space, it's very easy. You hold down the shift key and use your middle mouse button, and you can orbit around and look at this. Okay. Of course, a lot of people will use the view cube up here to do that same type of thing. You can, you know, rotate this around by clicking and just kind of dragging, but it's much more intuitive if you hold down shift and right click and kind of do this sort of thing. So to make this into a 3D object, all we have to do is come up here and click extrude, or type in EXT, and it will extrude the object. So I'm going to click extrude, and we'll pick this object here. And when I hit enter, it's asking me for the extrusion height if we look down here at the command line. So we can give it a physical value. We can type in 1 for 1 inch, or 0.5 for ½ an inch, or whatever. Or we can come over here in this viewport and we can drag it up. You can see here it's kind of it's gray right now, but you can see how we can drag this up, and this gives this object height. Okay, so basically at this point here we have our 3D object that has some height to it, and now in our front viewport and in our right hand side viewport we can see how that extruded up. Okay, so we can draw in any of these viewports and do the same type of thing. So for instance, in our front viewport, if I was to draw another polyline, and this time maybe I'll draw something that's more familiar, like a letter or something, like if I wanted to draw like an L. Okay, so I'll just come up here and sketch an L, kind of like this, and we'll match that up and close it off. Okay, so in our front viewport we drew the L. You know, notice up here in this top viewport all we have is just a line. Over here in our right hand side viewport we have a line as well. So if I start the extrusion in this viewport, say extrude, and we pick this polyline, okay, I can now drag this, or I can come up here and drag it in this window. You can see how it gives it depth, okay, like that. So we can just extrude that out like that. So it's very easy. If you can draw in 2D, you can draw in 3D. And then in our right viewport, okay, again, if I wanted to draw another letter, say we want to maybe do like an M or something, and we'll just turn off ortho for a second. We'll sketch this up kind of like this, put in an M, come down using our temporary tracking points. Okay, so we'll kind of do that sort of thing like that. Come up here, track that point across like that, come down, track that point, and close it off. So I have an M in this right hand viewport. Okay, notice in our other viewports, okay, in this one here we have it here, it's right in line with our other objects, so we can't hardly see the line. In our top viewport we can see it up here. Okay, so what I want to do here is, I'm not sure why they went away, let's try to regen, there we go. And so we'll go up here and extrude. I'll just type in EXT for extrude, and I'll pick my M. I'll come up here to this viewport and extrude that out like that. So now I have an M. Okay, so that's as simple as it gets to drawing these. Now, if you were watching me, to access each viewport, all I have to do is click in the viewport. I don't really like this white or this black background, so I'm going to change this background here. Let's see, we'll go into options for a second and just change to a light scheme here. Is that going to do it? No, that's not going to do it. Let's do colors. Let's do white. There. Make it a little easier for you guys to see. Alright. So, there are also other ways to draw in 3D. We just saw how to draw with a polyline, but there's something called primitives up here, where we have primitive 3D objects like boxes and cylinders and cones and spheres and pyramids and wedges and toruses. All of these are what we call solids. Okay, they're considered like a solid block of wood, or a solid piece of metal or something that has, you know, a solidity to it. There are other types of objects that can be drawn that are called surfaces. Okay, and there are also other types of objects that we can draw on that are called meshes. So we're going to get into surfaces and meshes later. We're going to start off with solids because they're probably the easiest things to draw in AutoCAD as far as 3D is concerned. And if we come back to the home panel, okay, everything's right there as well. So anyway, let's start off with a simple box. Basically, it's very easy to do. You just basically click the corners as if you were drawing a rectangle, and then it asks for a height, and we just give it a height of, say, 1, and there's our first 3D object. So we don't have to do an extrusion because we're doing a routine that draws a box for us. It draws a rectangle and it extrudes a rectangle a height. That's just basically as simple as that gets. If we come down here, we have cylinders. So a cylinder asks you to draw a center point for your circle. You draw out the diameter or radius of our cylinder circle, and then we give it a height. So we could say 10, for instance, and that will draw a object like this. Okay, so we have a box here now and a cylinder. And we can continue on, say cone. Cone works basically the same type of way. It wants a start point for the center, a radius for the base, and then a height for the height of the cone or the apex of the cone. So if I said 10 as well in there, you can see here we have our cone. Okay, going right along here, we have a sphere. Very easy to do. Sphere, you just basically drag out how big you want that, so either radius or diameter, and it creates a sphere. Pyramid, similar to a box, but basically you specify the center point and then you drag this out, and basically it has a radius of a circle that's either inscribed inside that square or circumscribed around it. So but basically you can just draw that out and just click, and then you give the height again of 10 and you have your pyramid. A wedge, basically you draw the first corner, draw the second corner, and then give the height of the wedge like a 10 again. And lastly, a torus, which is just a donut. You give it the torus, the outer radius first, and then you drag in the inner radius and you get a donut. So these are our solid primitives that you can use to draw just about anything. Quite honestly though, you're going to start out most of the time drawing the profile of your object first, and then extruding it and modeling it from there. But sometimes this is a good way to start. Honestly, I've used 3D since AutoCAD had 3D, so I can tell you from my own personal experience, I don't use these primitives all that often. They are kind of handy occasionally when you're showing someone 3D and how to do it, but honestly, you'll be drawing most of your objects using polylines most of the time. So let's erase all this stuff and kind of look at our first little project here. So if I was to draw something like this, you have to look at profiles when you're drawing in 3D. You want to kind of look at what direction that you're looking at this in is going to let you draw, take the least amount of effort, if you will, to draw the object. So if you look at this object and say this is our front, obviously this would be the top, and this is our right hand side view. Okay. If I were to start with the right hand side view, I would have to draw like a rectangle and extrude it out, and I'd have to bring it up and add all this up. It would be much easier to look at this in profile and draw the C shape, if you can see that C shape, okay, coming around here like this, just this C shape here, and extruding that down, and then drawing the other C shape and extruding that down and giving us this object. So let's do that. We'll start up here with the top view first. Okay, it's 2.625 by 3.125. Okay, and it's got a thickness of 1/2 inch. So however you want to draw that, you could do that. So let's do that up here in our top viewport. So I'll switch back over to AutoCAD for a second, and I should write these dimensions down, I guess, so that I don't have to keep flipping back and forth. And that's why we usually have a script when we're recording these, but I don't, so I'm kind of doing this on the cuff here. So 2.625 and 3.125. Okay, so we'll close this out for a second, and we'll come in here, and I'll just use a polyline, and I'm going to just start right here, turn on ortho, so I'm drawing in a straight direction. So 2.625, enter, and then we'll come over 3.125, enter, and we'll come down 2.625, enter. Okay, and I'll close that out, or stop that command. The reason I stopped it is because I just want to offset this 1/2 inch, because that's what it is. So we'll use the offset command of 0.5. So we'll offset that down like that. We'll finish this up by connecting up these lines like this. Okay, and now we're ready to extrude this, but we can't extrude this yet because, number one, it's a mixture of 2 polylines and 2 lines. So we have 2 options here. We can either convert this all into 1 polyline, or we can convert this into a region, because a region works in a similar fashion to polylines as far as extrusions are concerned. So let's look at both and show you how both work. So I want to just copy this over here like this, so we have 2 copies of it. Okay, so to make this first one into a polyline, we're going to use the p-edit command, or PE, and we'll basically pick this first one and say J for join, and then select all this stuff and hit enter, and then hit enter one more time to get out of it. So now we have a polyline. So that's ready to be extruded. Okay, so let's zoom up to this for a second. Okay, and then in this one, we're going to type in REG for region, and I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to just window this whole thing like this and hit enter, and I'm done. So which one's easier? Well, obviously region's a little bit easier. It's less keystrokes and a lot less things to have to do. You don't have to worry about joining things up or anything like that. It's either going to join or not. A region's going to work if all the lines are connected by their endpoints and there's no gaps or openings. And you can also see what happens over here. A polyline will just be an open polyline like this, and a region will actually put a surface on there. So that's basically a paper thin surface. It has no dimension at this point. It's actually at 0. There's no thickness to it. So either of these will work when I extrude these. How far do we have to extrude them? Well, let's look at this for a second. We have to do 1. It has a thickness of 1. Now, if we drew this on the ground, okay, this top shape, this C shape, and we wanted to extrude this down, it's going in the negative Z direction, okay? So it's going down, okay? So it would extrude this object -1. If we were drawing this from the bottom up, then we'd use positive numbers, but we're going to draw it down. So I'm going to come in here and we'll say extrude, and we'll pick this, and you can see I can either drag that up, positive, or drag it down, but we want to drag it down, so I'm going to say -1, okay? And in this one here, we'll pick this and extrude that -1. So at this point, there really isn't any difference in these two things. So I'll just erase this one and we'll continue on. Okay, so we're ready to start drawing the inner part. Okay, if we look at the inner part, we can see it's just a C shape as well, and it's offset 1/2 inch. So, and it's dropped down 1/2 inch as well. So what we're going to do is come up to the top viewport. Now, before I get going drawing this, our general inclination is to go in here with a polyline and basically click this endpoint and start drawing around this like this, and coming over like that and closing it off. And if you're lucky, then it worked. And the reason it worked in this case here is because we're drawing on this world coordinate system plane, which is this plane up top here. But there may be an instance where your object snaps might get confused, and instead of picking this endpoint at the top, it might actually pick this endpoint down here at the bottom. Okay, there's basically two things going on. We have our object snaps, and we also have this thing called allow disallow dynamic UCS. Okay, this dynamic UCS basically occurs when you hover over your 3D object like this and you're ready to draw something like a line, okay? And you can see how it highlights that top plane. When I come to this face, it highlights that face there. When I come to this face, it highlights that face there. It thinks that I want to draw on these different surfaces, okay? And this is really handy and it's very important. But in this case here, I don't want that to happen. This is a fairly simple object, so I'm going to turn that off temporarily by clicking on it down here. So that allows me to go in here and use my offset command to offset that 1/2 inch. So I'll pick this here and offset it in 1/2 inch, and then I'll come over here and draw a line from that endpoint to that endpoint, and I want to make sure that I get my endpoints and not something else. So I'm going to click like that. So now that I have that drawn, I can come back into my top viewport and use the region command again to highlight that, and it becomes a region. Okay, now we have to extrude this down. Okay, so if we look at our preview again, we can see that the total height of this object is 2.125 from the top here to the bottom of this one. This is 1 inch high, okay? So, and this is 1/2 inch down in here, okay? So basically what we need to do is subtract 1/2 inch from 2.125, so we should get 1.63, something like that. So, so we'll go ahead and do an extrusion. So I'm going to get in my top viewport and type in extrude. I'll pick this object, and extrude it minus 1.63. Okay, so it brings it down like that. Now we know that that top surface, or this inner surface, I should say, is a 1/2 inch lower than the other one. So in my right viewport or in my front viewport, it doesn't matter which one, I want to invoke the move command. So I'll just type in M for move. I'll pick this inner object here and just click anywhere on my screen, and dragging down I'm going to type in 0.5, and there I go. There's my 3D object. Okay, now we're not completely done at this point, okay, because what we have are two individual different solids. Okay, if I pick this one here, you can see that's a solid. Okay, and I pick this one here, that's a solid. But in solid modeling, this should all be one object. Okay, so I want to switch over to my solid tab here. In our solid tab, we have three things called Boolean commands. We have union, subtraction, and intersection. So what I want to do here is union these together. It's basically like welding these two objects together. If I hover over union for a second, it'll show me, in this case here, how it will combine the 2D solids or 2D regions. So you can combine any two or more 3D solids, surfaces, or 2D regions into a single composite 3D solid surface or region. Okay, so basically what ends up happening when you pick union is you pick this first object here, you pick this second object here, and when you hit enter, this becomes one continuous solid object. Okay, so if I want to demonstrate subtraction, okay, let's just use a region again. I'll just do a rectangle. Okay, and we'll just do a rectangle like that, and I'll do a circle in the middle like this. Alright, so over here I'm going to convert both of these into regions by typing in region, select both of them like that. So here we have our rectangle region and we have our circle region. Okay, I'll come up here and I want to subtract this whole from this other one. So the way subtract works is basically you have two volumes that overlap. Okay, you have your main volume here in this example of the wall. Okay, and then you have the box that's going through the wall. So where the wall and the box intersect, there's a volume that's overlapping there, and it's going to subtract that volume. Okay, so the same thing happens here. If we come up and pick subtract, okay, we can pick this object first. Okay, this is the object that we want to subtract from. So I hit enter, and then it's going to ask me to select the objects that I want to subtract, and I'll pick this middle object here. Okay, when it highlights it like that, I'll hit enter, and it subtracts it out as a whole. And then when I go to extrude this, okay, you can see we get, okay, that hole in there. Okay, so if I want to punch a hole in this object, even though we don't have one, say I want to put a hole in this back wall, okay, where would I do it? Okay, I want to put a hole like right here in this back wall going through this. So I wouldn't do it in the top viewport, and I wouldn't do it in the right hand side viewport. I'd do it in this viewport here, the front viewport. So basically what I'll do is I'll just draw a circle off to the side here for a second, just to show you as an example. So I drew this circle here, and then I'm going to use the extrude command, and I'm just going to extrude this some random length. I'll just kind of come over here and extrude this out like this. So I have this rod, if you will. So then I'll use my move tool and position that rod. Oops. Try that again. Move, and I'll pick here, and we'll just drag it over like this into that object like that. Okay, so when we look at this object here, we can see that it's overlapping volume. Okay, so it's going through this object. Okay, and it's also kind of cutting through that top object. So basically the subtract command is actually kind of fun to use, because you can go in here and I'll pick my main solid first and I'll hit enter, and then I'll come down here and pick my cylinder or my rod and hit enter, and it will subtract out that hole. So you can see there's my hole going all the way through that. Let's try it again. I'll do it up here in our top viewport. This time I'll punch one through the right hand side, so we'll come over to our right viewport. I tend to be losing my cursor for some reason or other. Okay, so I'll do a circle here again. But what if we wanted to put it in a specific location? So say I wanted it to be a hole that's, you know, 1/4 of an inch up and, you know, 1/4 of an inch in off the front face or something like that. In that case here, I would have to draw a couple construction lines. Okay, so I would draw a line like this going along there like that, and I'd draw another line like that going up like that. Okay, so you can see here in our right hand side viewport we have those two lines. So if we use the offset command, let's do a 1/2 inch. We'll do this 1/2 inch up, offset that 1/2 inch over. So that gives me my intersection point right there, where I can draw a circle right there, and I can put that circle in just right there. Okay, so you can see that circle on that surface. So now if I extrude this, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and give it an arbitrary length like that. Okay, so if I subtract this rod, it's going to subtract a hole in this side and in this side. Okay, so what if I want just the circle or the hole on this one edge? So if I use my move tool, I can kind of move that. Okay, so if it's going something like that, you can see the rod's not going all the way through. And in that case here, it will only put the hole in this one side. So let's demonstrate that. We'll come up here and subtract. We'll pick this first, hit enter, pick this second, and subtract it out. And you can see we have that hole in there now like that. Okay. When I'm done, I can erase these, you know, lines. Maybe I still want one going through this other side. So in that case here, I still have my construction lines. I'll put on a circle. This time we'll make this one a little bit bigger. Okay. It's in the same right location. It's centered where I want it to be. But let's extrude that. Okay, we'll come up here and we'll just bring it through like that. All right. So in this case here, if we did a subtract on this, it's going to subtract that hole over here and over here. But if I wanted just the hole on the left-hand side, I'd have to use the move tool, and I could move it in my upper viewport like that, so it looks like that. Okay. So you always have to remember when you're subtracting something, it's overlapping volumes. It's the volume of the two objects. It's the volume of the cylinder and of this wall. It's inside here. That's where it's going to do the subtraction. So if that was actually going through, just to show you an example here, if this was going through both like this, it's just going to make this hole bigger over here, and it's going to get rid of our original first hole. So let's see that. I'll use the subtract command and pick my first solid, pick my second solid, and then I have my two holes like that. So if I didn't want that to happen, I'm just going to undo, and I'll come up to my top viewport and use the move tool, and we'll move that across like this. Okay, we'll do it a little bit further so you can see it. Move it across like that. So now you can see they're not touching. Okay, we'll come up here, use the subtract command. I'll pick my solid, hit enter, pick this solid, hit enter, and now we have two different size holes there. Okay, so the other neat thing that we can do with solids is we can fillet the corners. So say for instance I wanted to put a fillet on this corner up here. Okay, I want kind of a rounded radius up here. It works a little bit different than fillet does with, you know, regular fillet. When you have two lines going like this and I want to put a radius in there, I use the fillet command and I give it a radius of say 2, right? And I pick this first line here, pick this second line here, and it puts in that fillet. Okay, with a solid, you don't pick the edges because there aren't any. Well, there are edges, but we can't physically pick them. But we can pick where the radius is going to occur along this line right here, the vertical line, instead of these two horizontal lines. We want the vertical line here is our fillet. So when I come in here and I use the fillet command, I pick my solid first, like this, and then it's going to ask me my fillet radius, and I'll go with a 0.5 radius, okay? So that's asked me to select the edge, okay? So I want this edge right here, okay? And when I hit enter, it fillets that. Now notice it filleted that first edge that I picked too, so you have to be careful about that, okay? So let's redo that again. So basically pick the solid in the area that you want to fillet first. So fillet, okay, so I'm going to pick like right here on this edge, okay? See the edge is already highlighted. I'll say 0.5, and it's asking me to select an edge or chain, loop, or radius. If I just hit enter, it will fillet that right there, and you can see how that will fillet that. So if I wanted to fillet an edge all the way around the top of this, then I could use fillet and pick this edge right here, and I'll say 0.25 this time, and I'll say I want it to be a chain. So I'll pick my second part right here, and it comes across like that and to there. And if it was a loop, then it would have picked the whole entire loop, but I can do a chain like that, and it will just round those edges over like that. Okay, so let's look at chain here. If we do fillet and we pick this edge again and do 0.25, and we do loop this time, we pick right here. Notice how it goes all the way around like that, and when I hit enter, nothing happens because that radius wouldn't work. You can't have 0.25 and 0.25 on a ½ surface. There wouldn't be anything left, so it has to be less than that. So let's go in there again, and I'll try it one more time. So I'll pick this edge again, and we'll go with 0.2 instead of 2.5, and we'll do loop again, and we'll pick our first edge on the loop right there, and then when I hit enter, it still didn't work. It doesn't like 0.2 either, so let's go with radius of 0.125. There we go. So you can see what happens. It's radius, it's putting a radius on both sides, okay, all the way around, okay. Typically filleting is the last thing that you do when you're doing any sort of modeling, but that's how you can go ahead and do a model like that. So that's basically it as far as our basics are concerned, and we're going to just start out with some simple models and go from there. So all we really need to know is how to draw our profile first, okay. In this case here, we drew the profile from the top. We could have drawn it from the front, but that would have been a little bit more difficult because I could have drawn this kind of weird shape and extruded it back, but I'd have to extrude this one back and then connect it up. The easiest, always pick the profile with the easiest route first and then build off of that.